Thank you so much for that very generous introduction. I would have to say that all of those publications are publications with other people. Many of those people are in this room, and I think that's been the essence of any success I've had has been because I've been working in teams with other people. And I've been incredibly fortunate to work with amazing people in Australia, New Zealand, now Japan, Indonesia, the US, Canada. So, and partly because of these meetings, because we meet one another and we discover what we share and love together. And my very first Altogether Better Health was Altogether Better Health 2. I was very young. And that was in Vancouver, and that was the first time I met John Gilbert, and he looked exactly the same. I remember it as clear as day. I walked into this, great big flat floor room, not like this, but it was all round tables and very serious people. And I'd been sent from my university to find out what this IPE thing was. And this man with a beautiful bow tie waved me over and sat me down. And it was just the beginning of a very successful area of work and study for me. So I owe a great debt to lots of people in this room. I'm standing here, and lovely friends from the UK as well. So kia ora, thank you. And I thought I'd try a little bit of Gaelic on you. So, gur mila mach agat. Thanks a million, as we say in the old country. So last night was great, and here we are today for the final day. And it is a little bit of a challenge, I have to confess. It's a little bit of a challenge to be standing here. You come to these conferences and you hear so many wonderful presentations every day, better than the previous, soapboxes, orals, workshops, and so on. And then you're all on the last day, and you've got all of this wonderful information, but then there's this, shocking fear. What if they've heard it all already? So maybe I've got nothing new to tell you. I hope that's not the case, but I think what's probably more likely is somewhere in the middle. I've got some things to tell you that you've probably already heard. And so for those people in the room who I plagiarize, I just say, imitation is the sincerest form of flattery. And for those people who are having sort of a déjà vu experience, just remember what we tell students, that, that repetition of content in multiple different contexts really builds deep learning. So what I'm talking about today, I was actually inspired by a man who's both US and Australian, for those people who may or may not know him. His name is Mr. Mel Gibson. And some of the younger people probably won't even know who he is. But he used to be a very famous actor, and in the year 2000, actually, which seems like a very long time ago, he released a movie called What Women Want, which I really loved, actually, at the time. It was a bit corny, but he played this awful advertising executive, a bit of a male chauvinist, who thought he knew all about women, and he could sell them anything. He had all the tricks, but which of course he didn't. And then he had a terrible, catastrophic accident and a change in his brain chemistry. And he woke up and suddenly he could hear the inner voices of all the women around him. The unfiltered, honest dialogue that runs in our head all the time, that most of us are too ashamed or embarrassed or fearful to ever say out loud. And that got me to think about the experience for many of our patients, when they present for care in whatever sort of service we're offering, of how little we really know about that inner voice, and the challenge we face of trying to build relationships with our patients to tap into some of those fears and worries and things that are embarrassing them, so that we can really build collaborative goals together. So that then set me off on a little bit of a journey of trying to find out a little bit about what patient-centered care was, and I actually, had to track down a definition because, well, you kind of need to check that you know what you're talking about. So I found this definition from Lane and Battersby from 2009, which talks about person-centered care. So I suppose, as a start-off, I should say, when I say patient-centered care, which is what I said, what the patient really wants in the title of this talk, I do mean the patient, the client, the person, the consumer, the whānau, the family, the village, the clan, the community, the population, whatever the entity is that we're working with. But I'm just going to say either patient or person for short, to save time. Otherwise, we won't get to the healthcare team challenge. And that would be a tragedy. So patient-centered care, according to Lane and Battersby, is about an approach that's grounded in a mutually beneficial partnership between providers, patients, and families. And it places the patient or the person as the focus of the provision of services, and the focus is on their needs, concerns, beliefs, and goals, rather than on the needs of the system or the professionals. So that sounds pretty good so far. I quite liked it to that point. And then I got to this third point, which I was almost tempted to just not put it in, because then I wouldn't have to deal with the slight ambivalence I felt about it, the difficulty I had with it. And that's after, a couple of glasses of wine, why I decided I'd leave it in. Because it's a little bit of the pebble in your shoe, if you like. So the patient feels understood and valued and involved, so that's all good in the management of their, in this case, their chronic condition. Patients are empowered by learning skills and abilities to gain effective control over their lives versus responsibility resting with others. And I just don't know if that's a universal reality that we want or that we can even have. And as I read a little bit more about patient-centered care, that seemed to be one of the slight little challenges that we need to attend to and be mindful of. So I'll just park that for the moment, and we'll come back to that shortly. So, of course, one of the great things about this conference was we had consumers here. We had extremely articulate, passionate and interesting people. We heard from Minnie on the first night when she told us about her experiences of having a lifelong condition that required a special attention, and then the complexities of having then an acute, serious health condition on top of that. And some of you may have had the pleasure of meeting Tony Spellman, who was here on Tuesday. He presented along with Monica Ode, who's a speech and language therapist, around the requirements for people with Parkinson's disease. But what he really talked about is positioning the person as the subject rather than the object of their care. So listening to other people's narratives, and then of course we listened to Denise's wonderful story about her auntie, with the Reader's Digest and the late night TV and the carers coming in, and her real struggle to trust those people because she hasn't got a point of reference or a point of connection with them. And that got me reflecting about my own career and my own life, and some of the reasons why I became a health professional. And I guess for lots of people in this room, there'd be a pivotal moment or a set of events that brought you to being a health or social care professional. And And that may relate back to some sense of motivation or responsibility of wanting to be person-centered, wanting to provide that support, that help for somebody else. Oh, I think I just touched the wrong button. And so for me, that was when I was quite young, when I was 12. I can remember again the day very clearly, driving with my dad, even though people in Ireland did drive at 12, but I didn't. But driving in the Hillman Hunter, which used to be a famous car as well, to collect my mum from hospital, having had the youngest sibling in my family, my youngest sister. And arriving at the hospital, and I was the eldest, so that was one of the privileges of being the eldest. I was allowed to go on that special trip. And going into the hospital, my mum sitting on the side of the bed in her floral dress, waiting to go home. And the first thing she said to my dad and me is, "The doctor's just been, there's something wrong with the baby." And she was right. There was something wrong with the baby. And the doctor was right. The doctor had probably couched it in slightly more depressing terms than that. He had given her the full story. He didn't have time to wait for my dad to arrive so she could get the news along with my dad. So my sister has Down syndrome. And so the message my mum got was a pretty grim one of poor functional outcomes, unlikely to learn, probably very shortened life, and not to expect too much. So fortunately, my mum has got probably a little bit like Denise's auntie. She has got a lot of confidence in the official health services. So the first thing she said was, "Look, I don't actually believe this." And then the second thing she said was, "Right, well, we're going to the priest." And so we got in the car and we drove straight to the priest's house. And the priest did a cure, a sort of a blessing and a mixture of probably something a little bit Christian and something perhaps not quite so Christian, something a little bit, informed by pre-Christian, because you get that kind of stuff where I come from. And it's true. And so my daughter and my sister came home to the family and was treated like all of the other siblings and grew up to be a very well-adjusted and healthy person. So let me just see. Here we go. There she is. This is my sister Sinead. So she's 45 maybe now. She works in a computer workshop. She lives at home. She will never live independent. She'll never live by herself, but then lots of us never want to live by ourselves. She'll never learn to drive, but she did learn to read and write, which was one of the things that was thought to be highly unlikely. And she's our family diarist and historian. So she's maintained a journal since she was 12. So in her room, there's a whole shelf of volumes of journals, and she records the minutiae of family details of what happens. So I suppose I wanted to, partly because this is a conference which has allowed for lots of narratives, I wanted to share that with you because that was, one, it was obviously significant in my life on a personal level, but also was significant in making a decision about where I wanted to go in my work life to become an occupational therapist. And I want you to also reflect on what were some of those motivators that brought you to your work life, those people you met along the way, whether they were people who impressed you or people that you felt touched by. Because I think, apart from the definitions, the real crux of patient-centered care or patient-centric care is that kind of heart connection with another person, even if they are a bit smelly, even if they are a bit foul-mouthed, you just want to make that connection with them. But unfortunately, we continue, even though we want this to happen, we continue to get this feedback from Denise and from Minnie and from lots and lots of clients and patients who write online and so on. They're not getting the sort of services that they want. And even in my conversations with people over the past 3 days, I've talked to so many people who've said, my experiences were very difficult. I didn't get good care. I didn't get good health care. I didn't get good team care. And I know how the systems work. What must it be like for the people who don't, who haven't got that insider knowledge? So we seem to have a disconnect in our capacity to take what's in our hearts and what's motivating us and allow it or access it to influence the systems and organizations in which we work. So, and this is particularly problematic for some of our, I guess, now going away from the individual patient word and going to the P for population word, some of our minority populations. So our Aboriginal and Torres Strait, in Australia, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander populations, LGBTI populations, people with disability, and so on, asylum seekers, refugees. We do even more poorly in that way. So I just want to tell you a little bit about a meeting I had with Danny, who is an Aboriginal health worker in rural Australia. So Danny works in quite a small, it's a small town, it's a couple of hundred people. There's no doctor there. There's what we call a nurse station. So the nurse provides the main health service. And Danny is the Aboriginal health worker. He helps, he's highly trained. He's almost like a physician assistant. He does lots of extended scope of practice things helping the nurse. But one of the really important things he does is that he introduces the health services to some of the local people who may feel quite anxious, quite uncomfortable, particularly with some of the procedures, or because English isn't their first language. So lots of Aboriginal people in Australia, English is not their first language. English is perhaps their third language. So he does lots of explanations and generally is a bit of a guide through the system. So there's a new service is rolled out, chronic disease management team with all of the health professions. It's tasked with going to these communities and managing the many people who've got cardiovascular disease, diabetes, and other chronic diseases. You know, the people who don't do well. And they arrive in town, they take over a building. Danny's asked to round them up and bring them in to see the team. And so people come along with quite a degree of trepidation and concern about what this is all about. And they go in and they see one person, and that's great. Maybe the podiatrist, maybe the physio, that's okay. And then they come out, and somebody else grabs them and says, no, I need to see you. And somebody else says, no, I need to see you after that, and I need to see you. And they realize that they're trapped. They have to see everyone on that team. They have to be seen by everyone on that team. That's the way it works. Because that's what we think is really good team care. We send everybody out. You get seen on the one day. You get all your health needs ticked off. But for people who don't understand that that's the way it works, that's really quite an imposition. No relationship, no real explanations about why you suddenly need to see all of these people. And so Danny said, they will go on the first day, but they won't come back. So we've created this service that looks like it's person-centered, ticks all the boxes, meets all the definitions, but it's still not hitting that connection. The scheduling is managed from the nearest large town, which is about 4 hours drive away. So somebody organises when this team goes out. It doesn't check what's happening in the smaller town. There might be a funeral on, there might be some special cultural business, there might be visitors coming to the area. There are all of these important reasons why it might not work, but nobody checks in advance. And so we end up with this breakdown in something that should work. And then I guess the final icing on the cake was the discovery that because it's a chronic disease team, if you go in and see the physio and say, look, I've got a really sore neck, that's not one of the chronic diseases. So the physio on the chronic disease team can't deal with that. You have to wait until the GP visits, get a referral from the GP, and then maybe a couple of months later, a musculoskeletal physiotherapist would be available. And if you still have a sore neck, you might get your neck looked at then. So we are getting there, but we still have a whole heap of structural and systemic issues that we need to address. And I'm saying we because, nobody else is going to do it. And we're the people who have this thing inside of us that makes us want to make a difference. Okay. So when I was talking to Danny, we were kind of talking about care and caring, and this idea that people don't want to just be cared for, they want to be cared about. And there is a bit of a difference, caring for and caring about. And if you can get both of those things happening at once, you probably have a better chance of success. So while I was preparing this talk, I struck gold because somebody published a great paper. When you're trying to find a paper that speaks to you about what you want to say. And one of the authors is actually in the room, Jill T. Where are you, Jill? There you are. So Jill, this one, Lorna's paper. Am I allowed to put this up?
Oh, yes.
Yeah?
I was just tweeting your previous slide.
Oh, were you? Oh, did you want me to go back to it? Nobody's ever tweeted one of my slides before. I feel as if I should. There you go. What do you need? What do you need to do?
That's fine.
Okay. I think you should tweet this one. This one is very important. So I don't know how many people know Lorna Davin. Is that how you pronounce it? So Lorna works over in Western Australia in Notre Dame University, but she did her PhD with Jill in Queensland and Emma Bartle, who's another interprofessional colleague of ours. And she did this is only a little bit of her PhD as I understood it. She just published a very interesting paper about what happens new doctors when they get really under the pump in that first year of practice, where they go in wanting to connect, wanting to be very patient-centered, wanting to help and get to know and understand their patients. And they have a number of things happen to them. One is they get extremely busy. So they're under a lot of pressure, they're tired and they're stressed. They also have role models who aren't always role modeling that type of behavior. Role models who model detachment and professionalism as a better way to be. And they have supervisors that sometimes make them feel they're not doing so well. So their sense of self and their identity as a good doctor is threatened and challenged. They feel vulnerable. And over a year, Lorna got this group of young doctors to journal their experiences every single week. And what came out was that as they gradually were ground down by those experiences, that busyness, that role modeling of detachment, that criticism and sense of not being good enough, their sense of compassion and compassionate behavior to patients was eroded. And they found themselves getting angry and getting judgmental and kind of, I guess, almost losing respect in some cases, Jill, would you say? Yeah, yeah. And I suppose, I think young medics, young doctors do have to work very hard. But I have no evidence to suggest that other new graduates from other health professionals don't have similar experiences and aren't also at risk of this result of feeling like they're losing their compassion. They're losing their sense of heart for the people that they, made the very decision to go in to work for and work with. And so this is one of the little snippets of narrative from one of the doctors. Just talking about all of those things and about, when he feels like a fraud, when he feels like he's not a real doctor, then he doesn't feel like he can show caring because, he hasn't got the goods. He's not good enough. So we're all educators here. We spend a lot of time with students, whether it's in the clinical world or in the university world, or whether we're working with postgraduate students. And I think it's important for us to be aware of the skills we provide to our students and the expectations we place upon them around performance, and not lose sight of the need for our students to be able to make those connections, to learn how to be compassionate, and to be very measured in how we introduce and layer on those stresses and those heavy workloads. Okay, so that's the kind of, I suppose, heart bit of my talk, if you like. But I did think, because I was coming to an international conference and so on, I probably should go to the literature. So I did, and actually went to Cochrane because, you can't go anywhere, better than Cochrane to get the true word on things. And I had a look at lots of studies that were about team-based programs because we are really interested in teamwork and team delivery of services. And so I looked at lots of studies for palliative care teams, rehabilitation teams, cardiac teams, chronic disease teams, oncology teams, and so on. And there is very good evidence for those teams improving functional outcomes, improving clinical outcomes, in some cases reducing length of hospital admission, and even in some cases improving quality of life. But there's nothing at all in there about how patient-centeredness, how patient engagement with their health professions, how patients being the center of the service was enacted. So that's not been captured. And you can kind of think, well, that's probably to do with the study design. But we're all researchers. And I think we need to be thinking, when we're doing our research, when we're researching our teams, how are we capturing how well patients felt that they were in the center of the team, that they were supported and cared about? Because if we're not capturing that, we might have a few days off the discharge time, reduced admissions, which will make some of the financial people very happy, but we won't ultimately improve that person's well-being in the long term. So I did find there is one study in Cochrane which is about teaching healthcare providers to be more patient-centered in clinical consultations. However, it's only looking at individual providers. So it's not looking at team-based care. So I thought, well, that's probably a little bit of a limitation. And it did say that there is some evidence about the effectiveness of giving patient-centered skills to providers. So you can teach patient-centered skills to providers, according to this analysis. However, The results around the effects of patient satisfaction, changes in health behavior and health status are mixed. So we don't even have good evidence to when individual providers are taught those skills. We're really getting to support our patients and our clients. So that's what it says in the literature. So then I thought, oh, well, I'll have a look at what's happening in the other literature. Now, it's not the Grell literature, but, you know, the tweetosphere and the blogosphere and so on. And that's where you find lots of really angry people. I can tell you, you know. And some of them are very articulate as well, and so it can be quite good. If you're feeling fairly resilient, it can be quite good, but don't go in there if you're feeling a bit vulnerable. Yeah. And I've actually reproduced an entire blog for your interest, because I'd be really interested to get your take on this particular topic. And I'll just forward it with this comment. You know, I did talk about earlier the number of people I met over the course of this conference who talked about their challenges with, you know, accessing health care for themselves, for their families, and feeling that it was satisfactory. And then some of you may have seen this. This is a lady called Carolyn Thomas, who's done a blog in the BMJ which says, "Why physicians must stop saying we're all patients." So I'll just give you a couple of minutes to read that, and then I'll go on to the rest of it. Sharon, you can be my test person. You can tell me when it's time to press the button. Okay? This is the last page, I promise. Harsh. But is it true? Yeah. Okay, so I suppose that's another question to pose is, who is the patient? Are we all patients? Probably we all are at some times, but obviously some people are more patients than others. So back at the beginning of this talk, I put up the little definition of person-centered care, and I wanted to share with you a few points from an article from Anne Fox and Scott Reeves from 2015, which is a bit of a critique of patient-centered care, and it's quite a detail. It's a really great paper if you get a chance to read it. And I'll show you the reference in the references when we get to the end. And their basic premise is that this focus on patient-centered care, as it's currently defined, is intrinsically linked up with ideas of empowerment and self-management. And so there's almost like a conflict, a mismatch with this idea of care and then this idea of self-management and empowerment. So there are a number of different conflicting elements operating within the same bundle, if you like. And so some of the particular points they raise are about patients often are not in a position to be empowered to contribute to activities, particularly such as shared decision making. Very complex thing, shared decision making. I don't even think I'm very good at it. I have to make decisions at work. And, you know, how many people have had training in decision making here? About 3 or 4. Yeah. It's not an easy natural skill. And we're talking about then our patients who perhaps haven't had the benefits of some of the opportunities for training that we've had. Patients may not be in a condition to take on self-management of a condition. They may not have the inclination for self-management. It may not work for them for a whole range of reasons: personality, cultural reasons, cognitive reasons, and so on. This idea of a shifting of the responsibility. So the burden of responsibility shifts to the patient. And with that, the blame, if things go wrong, can often shift to the patient. And so we can potentially have patients with chronic diseases that, by their very nature, will continue to get worse, but we don't have to take such responsibility as health providers because we're shifting the responsibility to the people who have those diseases. So it's kind of an interesting spin on this idea of patient-centered care. So somehow it comes with some quite significant responsibilities. And it's almost like you need to think, well, what is this I'm signing up for? Maybe I'd be better with standard care. Maybe patient-centered care is not as good as I thought. Another criticism that Anne and Scott came up with is this idea that disadvantaged patients, so patients of their economic or social disadvantage, may not even engage with the idea of patient-centered, empowered self-management. And I guess that's perhaps Danny's clients. And so they respond by not showing up. They just drop out of the system, so they're not getting any care at all. On the other end of the spectrum, you've got the Dr. Google patients who can be quite unpopular because they come in and they know too much. And finally, this idea that, this can be a real over-focus on patient self-monitoring at the expense of some of the other functions. So it's not quite as straightforward as we might like to think. And it's heavily influenced by the consumer movement. Again, a great thing, and this is the Australian consumer movement. We love this, don't we, Roger? We love the Australian consumer movement. They're a very fine organisation, very supportive of interprofessional education, collaborative practice, because they see that as a way of improving outcomes for the Australian population. And we are lucky to have, in Australia, we're lucky to have a national consumer organisation that speaks at quite high levels. And so this is, I suppose, another question I'll be interested to hear maybe from some of the UK people. The Australian Consumer Forum has just introduced to Australia this idea of collaborative pairs. So people from the UK here familiar with collaborative pairs? It's from the King's Fund. Yeah. So it's a leadership training program to skill up consumers at a high level to go into a pair with a senior health professional and to spend time together, learning to make decisions together in order to inform health practice and health policy. And so the Consumer Health Forum has just started a 2-year trial. They've flown out the King's Fund people from London. They're somewhere in Melbourne sipping lattes and running this leadership program. And hopefully, and I've got some of the documents with me if you want to have a look at them, hopefully developing skills that will improve services for consumers. Some of the international things that are informing this, and John Gilbert, you probably know more about this than I do, is this global strategy on people-centered and integrated health services, which is, I think, got a lot of focus on accessibility, which is important. But it also has, the other side of the coin. It's also about being efficient, reducing costs, and so on, and improving health literacy. So that document led me to, so I can just see somebody's just scribbling down. This document, which again some of the UK people may be familiar with, I hadn't seen it before, called People in Control of Their Own Health and Care, the State of Involvement. Anybody come across that one? No? Yes? No? It's a really interesting, you can get it off the web, it's a really interesting one because it talks about a whole range of different, I guess, approaches to involvement that are informed by different theories. So, involvement from a consumer aspect, democratic involvement, ethical and outcomes-based, values-based, based on sustainability, because we have limited resources, or a person-centered approach. So, unpicking what it looks like to actually be involved in your own healthcare, and what sort of, I suppose, philosophical and moral theories might be informing where we're positioning ourselves and our patients. So that led me to shared decision-making, back to shared decision-making, because it's becoming quite a hot topic, and particularly for older people. And I'm guessing, say, in Australia and in other countries, is shared decision-making becoming an issue with older people? And what we're seeing is, and this is Tammy Hoffman is a colleague of mine from Bond University in Queensland. What we're seeing is kind of an increase in the development of decision-making tools, checklists, and text-based tools for people to use to help with making decisions. And, we can see where this is coming from with an aging population, cognitive changes. We don't know, we want to know what people want to happen. But we've got no evidence around how appropriate these tools might be for some of those populations, those minority populations that I spoke of earlier on, our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, our migrant community, our refugees and asylum seekers, our people with disabilities. How are they going to be involved in this idea of shared decision-making? So how are we going for time? Okay. Yeah. That's fine. That's fine. I'm just making some decisions about skipping over a few things. Yeah. Say again?
Are they shared decisions?
Yes, that's right. What do you think? Should I chop a few? Yeah. All right. Well, I was going to talk a little bit about the student clinic, but I'll skip that, I think, just because that was an example. So this is just an example of a project that Jill and Margot and Carol Orchard and I were all involved with a couple of years back, of having students working in a chronic disease management clinic where we collected qualitative data. So, of course, it didn't make it into a Cochrane review. But we interviewed the people who are coming through that clinic about their experiences of team-based care provided by an interprofessional student team. And we got some really, lovely narrative comments. And so that was what we, the first comment we got was, I feel like I've been lifted out of a hole by coming here. doesn't that make your heart sing? If you could have someone come into you and say every day, what you've done for me has just lifted me out of a hole. So I won't dwell on, so we collected some, I'll just go through very quickly the themes. We collected information about the sort of losses that people were able to talk about, you know, and they're, you know, pretty much as you would expect, losses of valued roles, losses of relationships, you know, financially related losses, loss of dignity, not being able to put your undies on, loss of the sort of companionship of being able to get out on the golf club. Then some information about the physical and social environment and, you know, how that can really help in terms of the patient journey, having somewhere that's nice and bright and friendly. And then lots of nice feedback about the students, particularly in comparison to some of the qualified professionals that they'd worked with, which perhaps lends a little bit of weight to Lorna's work. You know, the students took time and they listened, they go the extra mile and so on. And a sense of pleasure from the patients about having some responsibility as an educator, that they were providing that help. And I'm sure lots of people have had results like that in their work. So I'm just going to skip on through. Okay. So we might finish. Well, I'll go past. Yeah, I can't go past this one. So we might have a look at this. I wanted to bring this to you because it's a very short little video of a project we did in school holidays. So just, I don't know, in July, a couple of weeks ago. And it's the Jambanu Basketball Academy. But what it actually is a primary health project for late primary and early high school kids who are at risk of dropping out of school and also at risk of a range of other, I guess, teenage health issues. So we brought these kids together with a basketball coach, and we set up a basketball academy over the school holidays. And as well as playing basketball, the kids also had a series of workshops with sexual health counsellors, social workers, physiotherapists, nutritionists, the quit smoking team, and a bunch of other people who had students with them. But it was all woven into the basketball academy. That was the hook. That was what made it special for these kids. So it only goes for a couple of minutes.
Three, two, one! This basketball program is a JBA. It means Jambanu Basketball Academy, and the word Jambanu in Aboriginal means the region of Geraldton. To improve not just basketball, but change in their lifestyles and how they look at it, show them different pathways. We've got life sessions in there where we get people come in and talk about things other than basketball. They talk about healthy relationships, unhealthy relationships, they talk about nutrition, they talk about all the good stuff, the bad stuff, and it's just another different spin on life.
Small wins come in ways of, say, the kids developing their basketball skills for one, in a friendly environment, and also picking up on some good life skill stuff that JP and the team put together for the kids at least once a day. I got involved because I think it's a great idea for any Aboriginal person to give back, I suppose, to their people and to their community.
The friendships that are being created here is pretty amazing. To be able to bring two people who didn't know each other's names, to be able to bring them and start that bond with them, which between each other is pretty special. And yeah, the skills are definitely improving by the second that they're here.
So yeah, it's not only just taught the kids a lot, but it's taught me a lot too. So I guess in the long run, a lot of kids like me can learn a lot too, because like Ike, JP, Huya, Linnell, they're just really helpful with kids my age. So for them to bring me in and help other kids younger than me, it's really good. So if this program could go like a long way, a lot of people, like the whole community, will be better.
Coming out as a mentor and as a coach, I learned that taking responsibility for yourself, and I learned to get along with everyone. Also learned to take control when everything's going crazy, how kids go. But at the moment, like, they're good kids and they need, understand it. They're here, they're young, they want to have fun. But we're here to teach them also.
Okay, so I'll just finish it there because it goes on. But I guess you get the idea. It's a different type of health service. And it's a health service that the parents of those kids wanted. They wanted something that would be fun, that would get them together, and we could introduce all of these health messages in a completely different way to what they're used to. So, in summary, my take on perhaps the way forward is to continue to do what we're doing, to listen, to understand the aunties and the sisters and the cousins and all of the people we come in contact with, care about as well as care for, support our students to be good but not perfect by embedding them in healthy, well-resourced teams, use cultural guides, leaders, elders, whatever the appropriate terminology is in your part of the world, to broker introductions and to bring in people who otherwise are outside of the service world, to include the patient voice in research, evaluation, design and delivery, so that we know what we're doing in terms of being patient-centered, and we know where it's actually making a difference in results and outcomes. Engaging with consumer organizations. I'm sure in all of your countries you will have consumer organizations. They do amazing things. And I think that it brings great benefit to us to have that relationship. Consider developing some strategies to ensure that patients are involved in your organization. I'm sure many of you already have that. And the other thing is to think about how you might work together to build up that group of patients, so that we can scale up and have people who are interested in working with us. So I've got some references there, and then there's another page of references. And so that's it. Oh, could we just leave the references up? Sorry, Mr. IT? Thank you.
Thank you.
So we've got this page, and then I've got another page, so just let me know if you want me to flick over.
I'll let you two head out with the students, if you can just follow Wendy and Philippa. And we have got time for a couple of questions, because the students need to do some bits and bring in their chairs. So it would be great to take some questions, because this has been a really inspiring presentation. I love that video. That was fantastic.
Yeah, it's just made, yeah, it is
It's just lovely.
Yeah.
And so the authentic voice of the youth.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good luck. Go.
Just the students, nobody else is allowed to move.
You want me to go back one? This is the second one, yes it is, yeah.
Any questions or a comment? Question up here? I would like to hear a little bit more about the student clinic.
Oh, right.
Would you mind just...
Sure.
So, would anyone else like to hear a bit more about that, just while we're waiting for our other students to come back in? That's good.
Sure,
Yep,
sure.
there's
So-
some nods up there.
So the student clinic, there are lots of student clinics now in Australia. I mean, we're pretty fortunate that there was a little bit of a, I suppose, we had Health Workforce Australia, that lots of people would be familiar with. It was a government initiative that brought us a lot of funds, but it didn't last. So that's kind of the sad thing with these initiatives. But people built student clinics, and in Rockhampton there had been, so Rockhampton is a large regional town with high disadvantage in Queensland. There had been a clinic operating in a little strip mall, in a little disused shop. There was a podiatrist and a physiotherapist and an occupational therapist working together. And they were focused on chronic disease management. So when some funds became available, the local university, with support from the division of GPs, as it was then, so the Primary Health Leadership Organisation, pooled resources, and the local health service, which is actually funded from a completely different stream of funds, also pooled resources, and they put together a very beautiful health clinic. And because it's part of the university, the Vice-Chancellor puts the university art collection, because, if you have a nice university and you've got an art collection and you wander around the corridors, you see some lovely artwork. And so the clinic is treated in the same way as the rest of the university. It's been designed with lots of outdoor areas, which is very important in a community where we've got lots of Aboriginal people. Yarning outside in the shade is quite an important way of people becoming comfortable and dealing with some of the anxieties about being in a kind of a foreign or dangerous environment. The clinic is staffed by a local public health team of 11 different professions at this point. It's all free because it's public health, and students from all around the country will go on placement attached to those professional groups. The experience is probably something between 30 and 40% interprofessional, and then 60 to 70% uni professional, in order to cover the range of people who are coming through the doors.
Great.
Yeah.
And there's been funding.
So it now continues. So the university looks after the building.
Yep.
And the local health department pays the salaries for the health personnel, and the GPs don't have their offices, their waiting rooms constantly clogged up. That was their concern, that they were getting gridlock in the waiting rooms with so many people with chronic diseases. So those people are now being managed, and as our feedback suggests, getting service that they find perhaps a little bit more suitable for their needs, because they're getting that interprofessional.
Yeah. Lovely. It's a great model of co-design, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah.
And, just things came together.
Yeah. Wonderful.
Yeah.
Any final points? Otherwise, I think we'll wrap up and we'll move on to letting the Healthcare Team Challenge set up. Thank you very much, Monica. That's been inspirational.
Thank you.